Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today it's our pleasure to present I Am Cuba, directed by Mikhail Kalatozov. This film from 1964 was a Soviet and Cuban co-production. Neither country liked it after it was finished, and it really stayed on the shelf for many, many years. But then, several years ago, it was rediscovered and is now recognized as one of the masterpieces of political cinema of the 20th century, ranking with Battleship Potemkin and Triumph of the Will. This is a film of an amazing visual texture. I think you'll be actually awestruck by some of the things that you see. And today, afterwards, it's our pleasure to have as our guest Yevgeny Yevtushenko, the distinguished Russian writer, poet, and filmmaker who was also the co-writer of this film. Now, take this opportunity to luxuriate in the visual textures of I Am Cuba. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this rare opportunity to see I Am Cuba, an extraordinary film on the shelf for many years, but now available and open to discussion about its extraordinary qualities, visual and narrative. It's a real pleasure to welcome to City Cinematheque the distinguished Russian poet, writer, essayist, performer, filmmaker, Yevgeny Yevtushenko, who is also a distinguished professor at Queens College of the City University of New York. Welcome to City Cinematheque, Mr. Yevtushenko.
Thank you.
You are the co-writer of this film. Let's talk about the origins of the film. Were you already in Cuba at that point? What were you doing when this film was?
You know, first of all, the Cuban Revolution was very important for my generation of Russian young intellectuals, Russian writers, poets, for everybody in Russia, because we have very old, big cheeses in Russian politics. They were not able to improvise their speeches. They were always very boring, their speeches. And so that's just very, it was like, we were very fed up with this ritual of their politics, of their congresses, and so on. At that moment appeared young, irresistibly charming man who overthrew, without any foreign help, dictator, Batista, his police regime. A man who was walking on the streets of Havana almost without bodyguards, and I've seen him in it, talking with the people, drinking with the people, and a man enough intellectual, I mean, and very young, promising, and wonderful figure for that time. So that was and many Russians of my generation, not only Russians, I think some Americans too.
Absolutely.
For instance, people of Evergreen Review, when I was publishing my poetry at that time, they were in love with him. And I think you Americans made big mistakes with Fidel Castro, because after he won this revolution, it was Velvet Revolution almost, and so when he came to the United States immediately. Instead, to show him welcomed face, you showed me some other less pleasant parts of your body.
Right, indeed.
So, and because you asked information probably from your CIA or from some Cuban immigrants who immediately, Batista's supporters, your former friends.
Right.
And so it was wrong information. So he was, how say, caliph for 1 hour.
Right.
But it was not true. And so we made a mistake, and afterwards we began to organize this invasion to Cuba through the Bay of Pigs. And that time I came to Cuba, and I never been member of Communist Party. I could say did belong to the generation who were dreaming about socialism with human face before Dubček, before,
Right.
and that's why leaders of Czech Revolution, they were permanent visitors of all my readings in Moscow, of poets of our generation.
Right.
And and this is, Fidel was also one of incarnations of this dream of free socialism, socialism with no censorship, socialism which gives freedom of to the all styles of in paintings and literature,
Right.
and so on. And that time, young Kennedy inherited idea of invasion from Eisenhower's administration, and happily, he in last moment he cancelled aviation support.
Right.
Happily, that's why it was almost bloodless and so on. But afterwards, absolutely unexpectedly, for Russians, because Russians, it's very interesting that Russians, Fidel was taking money from everybody. From everybody, from some Americans. And one Russian, I could say, freelance James Bond, Russian, Alexeyev, he was in Mexico under the cover of a journalist. And he liked Fidel very much. And he wrote his coded information that Moscow has to support Fidel, to give some money.
Right.
And Moscow behaved as Americans. You asked information from CIA and Cuban immigrants, and Moscow leaders asked information of Cuban Communist Party. Cuban Communist Party gave very negative resume about Fidel Castro. Fidel was not absolutely communist at the beginning, absolutely. His brother was a little bit connected with some young communist league, but in a way. So you made the wrong decision, and you turned, you began to push Fidel on the different road. Right. He gave first step Fidel did as a leader of Cuba. He gave hand to America, and America didn't accept his hand. So it was, and I came there, and I really have seen beautiful beginning of Cuban Revolution. I never seen, I was so happy, childishly happy, and I was writing my poetry, which was not a little bit superficial, because joy sometimes doesn't help us to analyze events, Yes, in this moment, and I was publishing, I was a correspondent of Pravda, not being member of Communist Party. It's never happened before. And I was poetical correspondent, sending my very romantical poetry through the Western Union, so destroying Pravda economically. Right. So, and even that's one of our leaders, Khrushchev, he made a joke that nobody, even worst enemies of socialism, didn't make such economical damage for communism like Yevtushenko's poetry sent through Western Union to Pravda. So, in this moment I was invited. My poetry was very well received. Because Russians, they liked Fidel too. Many Russians, they were calling with the name Fidel their children that time. And so Kalatozov, a great film director.
Indeed.
He made a film which was very popular in Cuba, Cuando vuelan los cigüeños, and when cranes are flying.
The cranes are flying, it's called in English.
Yes, cranes are flying.
A film, by the way, available here and known in the United States.
And it was the first film which broke Iron Curtain between our countries. Right. Novel Dr. Zhivago and film Cranes Are Flying, they created this breakthrough.
Right.
Again, already getting rusty Iron Curtain.
Right.
In this moment, Gagarin came in Cuba. It was also a splash of enthusiasm.
Right.
And I went in Cuba. That was moment after the invasion, and so they invited me to write this script. In this moment, I was attacked by some hardliners because of Babi Yar, my poem against anti-Semitism, and another poem, Heirs of Stalin, which very interesting that I wrote in Cuba, being correspondent proud. So, and in this moment, but it was not easy for them, for Kalatozov and Rusevsky, to get permission to support, to suggest me as a script writer for first Cuban-Russian collaboration in arts. But they did it. They were very stubborn. And so I was working. Here I came second time to Cuba, and I learned already Spanish. But when they came here, it was different times already.
Okay.
A bit different era. Fidel made some mistakes, and I was a witness that Khrushchev asked him with a special coded telegram not to close private market in Cuba. Very interesting.
Khrushchev asked him
and made some people for the Western press. I've read this because Mikoyan, when Mikoyan came in Cuba, in my presence, they decoded Khrushchev's personal cable letter to Fidel Castro, and I was witness how it was read. And afterwards it happened. So
it's another revolution.
Afterwards it was missiles and so on and turmoil. And when Kalatozov and Rusevsky came to Cuba, I wanted to show them beautiful vegetable market, vegetable market in Cuba. Many floors, you know, that's beautiful. Like it looks like a Guggenheim museum, something like that. And we came there first morning of Rusevsky and Kalatozov. They were very nervous, very inspired, very happy being in Cuba. And it was just whistled. Wind was empty, all those, and only Bulgarian vinegar, some Russian tin cans, and lining up for something Cuban women.
Right.
Gardens were covered, fields were covered with rotten fruits because they stopped commercial, private
agriculture.
As they didn't organize states buys of products, you know, that was very spontaneously.
Right.
And so in Kalatozov and Rusevsky heard they were crying.
Right.
They were crying because some Cuban women were Russians go home. The same, instead Yankee go home. Because they thought that this market is closed because of Russian pressure.
Right. Where in fact, you had been present for Khrushchev saying, don't do this, it would be a mistake to do this. Yeah, yeah. Well, let me just stop you just for 1 second. For those who did not read the titles of the film carefully, just to point out that when you speak of Kalatozov and Urusevsky, it was Sergei Urusevsky who was the partner of Mikhail Kalatozov and who was his director of photography. And it's their collaboration that is responsible for this magnificent visual texture of the film and for their anterior work, like The Cranes Are Flying, that is so distinguished visually. Well, now did you work, what was the arrangements in terms of the work with the Cubans? You were working with, I know, the Cuban novelist and filmmaker later, Enrique Pineda Barnett. So you were doing research while you were in Cuba?
Yes, first of all, we were working with incredible conditions. The dream for all movie makers, you know. We got but we working 3 or 4 months to find material for the script, just to find, you know, it's a dream, you know. And we were, I repeated way of Fidel Castro and Sierra Maestra together with Enrique with rucksacks, not Kalatozov, it was too much for him. And he, at the same time, he was sitting in Havana checking old documentary films of Batista. I've seen them too when I came back by nights. And Pineda Barnett and me, we decided to write separate versions and to try to combine. So that's how we were working. And I don't think what, it doesn't matter, you know, in such a collaboration, what belongs to whom, it doesn't matter, you know.
No, absolutely. And was it always to be this film of multiple episodes, which, you know, we know there are many anthology films, but one thinks here not of the visual texture, but of the sense of episodes of something like Rossellini's Open City, where you get the...
Beautiful film. Roma città aperta.
Absolutely. And in which you get these different views of the society at the time from different... Was that your kind of model, or how did you...
Yes, I could tell you what all our generation of writers, we are, were influenced, even not only in the cinema, but in our literature, in our poetry, by Italian neorealism. Because in Italy, during fascism, totalitarian regime, it was very pompous, so-called films of cinema of white telephone.
Right, exactly.
So other things, you know, pompous opera-like made films which were not connected with the reality, absolutely. And when you see Roma città aperta, Bicycle Thieves, another wonderful film, unfortunately forgotten, you couldn't find it in the United States on the cassette, and even in Italy you couldn't find it. Roma alle 11, Rome at 11 o'clock. It's a great film by De Santis. Other films, you know, for us, it was a great discovery. It's again pushed us back to the road of realism, to reality, from the fake reality of totalitarian regime. And when I met later, I met Cesare Zavattini,
right,
and I told him, but we all are children of your Bicycle Thief, which is still my most beloved film of the world. And he said, but we were children of Russian realism of the end of 19th century. Right. And so our, in a way, Chekhov, through Italian neorealism, also, they came back to us. Right. And that was great. And that's why we wanted to make something. That's why we decided to avoid a contemporary story, what is going now, because it's very deep, but clear, was real truth. It was, regime of Batista was unbearable, and rebellion against this regime was fair. Exactly. And that was real true history. We didn't want to touch current politics, because we were right. That's why this film you see, and you understand, you could feel that film made with sincere hands.
Absolutely.
But there are some naive views,
okay,
of course. Naive views. In my opinion, generally, Urusevsky, first of all, was dictator.
Is that right?
Was, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, tell me about that.
Many geniuses are dictators.
And a genius of cinematography he was, yes.
Yeah. And so he just told me, his condition was, no words. Cinema, it's a visual art. So the dialogue is that's a minimum, just minimum. He wants that. In the beginning, he didn't want even one word. So it's one of my weapons, words. I understood him partly, but I think when so he exaggerated in his imagination the importance of cinema only like a visual art. He was a painter, good painter, above all. Himself, and he himself became the film director. He made some not bad films, but they were like you couldn't use even for salad concentrated vinegar. You understand?
Right, I understand.
So it was so beautiful. But sometimes his films, which was so beautiful, but sometimes each shot was so beautiful, it was too concentrated. It was impossible to use, to consume it.
Absolutely.
The eyes were tired, and that's why it belongs to kind of art so beautiful that you want to piece of I don't want to say it this word. Okay, yeah, murd, the murd.
Okay.
The piece of the murd, you know.
Doggy do is what we sometimes
Doggy do, okay, doggy do, you understand?
I understand very well.
But we were discussing him. He was a man alive and so. And it was torture for me to write with no words, no. And, but I understood his view. But sometimes I would become desperate because, you know, that I was a very skillful guy because living on the 17th floor of Havana Libre, former Havana Hilton. So I taped about 4 on the slow speed,
right.
About 4 hours on my tape, recording tape, my writing,
okay.
typewriter, and I was going to beautiful Havana night clubs,
right,
sipping not less beautiful cocktails, and so pretending that I'm working. So that Enrique was working and we were meeting, but a little bit step by step, and I could tell you generally about results. I think that in this film, probably weakest part is the script. Probably.
Okay, yes.
Probably.
Yeah.
But because I worked only for Urusevsky sometimes.
Yeah.
Kalatozov was, unfortunately, sometimes he was a softer than Urusevsky.
Okay.
Urusevsky was dictating even him. And most beautiful part of this film, it's a cinematography itself.
Absolutely.
Script, very sincere, believe me. We don't think about any political profit, how it will look in eyes of Fidel himself or eyes of our government. We were not thinking about it. We were doing it film is very sincere, but naive.
Yeah.
For instance, the piece about American sailors, we couldn't get American actors. One French actor having role American, you know, that's funny. It's unnatural. Right. We invited probably for as extras for American Marines, Estonian or Latvian. Right. So it was a kind of fake, you know, a little bit, right. Because it was Cuba was isolated at that time, right. And so there are some naive parts, but cinematography is absolutely unbelievable, beautiful, and I think this film, when Francis Coppola, Coppola and Martin Scorsese, they discovered this film, right. And Dusty Archives, they made a great deal for future American movie makers.
Right.
For instance, two pieces. For instance, it's when camera goes down, right. From the highest floor, yes, to the swimming pool, or other demonstration, for instance, funerals, absolutely unbelievable. It's absolutely new language of cinema.
Absolutely.
And many young Americans, movie makers, who are now, they are already, even some of them are already the present of American cinema, not only future. They learned a lot from, a lot.
Absolutely.
So I'm happy that I participated. It was a great experience, and I admire generally Cuban character, Cuban painting, Cuban people, dances, and I hope that in near future America finally will improve a relationship and will understand what you made at the very beginning of Cuban Revolution. You made mistakes, right. In relationship with Cuba.
Well, let's talk about what happened to this film in its first stage after it was finished, because the film was not liked and disappeared. Well, who disliked it, and what did they say about it, or did they say anything?
Because I told you what already happened. Right. Because, you know, honeymoon of Russian people with the Cubans, it was over very quickly.
Right.
Some Cubans began to accuse Russians in all economical mistakes. I'm not just a man who just trying to defend Russians. Of course, I'm sure that it's a pity what we had missiles and war, and I've been that time,
Right.
and I know how world was close to nuclear war.
Right, exactly.
Right, I felt it, but you know who was on my laptop when American planes, they were like this, like a shaving, almost shaving our hair on our heads, were flying over swimming pool. I was sitting at the swimming pool. On my laptop was a boy about probably 10 years boy. It was a future prime minister of Russia in Yeltsin's government, Gaidar. And he made a P on my laptop at this moment. So I remember very well.
It's a very concrete memory of that.
Yes. And I remember very well that was a big difficulty with the food, and I got for New Year just one little piece of garlic from task correspondent of Russia for New Year. That's I remember.
Right.
And so, and the Cubans, they were marching on the streets, they were insulted. They feel insulted by both sides.
Right.
And Fidel, and I understood Fidel, because we were talking with Americans overhead of Fidel. But it was, it was not on purpose to insult him, or humiliate him, but it happened because it was very difficult situation,
Right.
We need a quick decision, final decision. I remember beautifully one day when our representative at the United Nations, he was declared that we have no missiles in Cuba, and it was published in the same newspaper, Izvestia, and on the other page of the same number, the same day was published that we will take our missile from Cuba if you take your closer American base in Turkey. It was in the same number. So I've seen all these chaos. Happily, I could say that this is what happened in Cuban Missile Crisis, that we showed our leaders, Khrushchev that time and John Kennedy, different generation people, they gave us an example that even in some critical moments of the mortal danger for all the rest of humanity, despite of all ideological difference, our leaders could find common language and common sense could win. So
I'm going to have to, I hate to do this to you, but this is a great place to end, and we have run out of time, but I can think of no better place to do so than cautioning people about the common sense that world leaders may have. If you'd like to know more about City Cinematheque, please get in contact with us. You can do so by visiting our website, www.cuny.tv. Again, that's www.cuny.tv. Mr. Yevtushenko, I cannot thank you enough for your presence here, your memories, your insight, your analysis, and simply your voice, a voice very well known in the world of literature of the 20th and 21st century. And please, I hope you'll join us again as on City Cinematheque we do our best to find the best of world cinema in the extraordinary archives available to us. Thank you so much for joining us today.